US-India relations destroyed by one Indian Trump reveals the shocking truth. Let me tell you something, when history books are written, they don't always capture the real turning points, the moments where one decision, one man, one statement flips the balance of power and leaves the world scrambling to understand what just happened. People like to believe geopolitics moves slowly, like tectonic plates, but the truth, it moves in sudden cracks, in earthquakes, in shocks no one saw coming, and sometimes it's not a nation, not an army, not even an institution that makes the world stop. Sometimes it's one person, and right now the world is watching because the entire US-India relationship, one of the most complex, profitable, and strategic relationships of the 21st century, was shaken to its core by one Indian. Yes, one voice cut through the noise, one bold step broke the mask, and even Trump himself couldn't stay silent. He revealed the shocking truth, and it left people gasping. You see, the United States always believed it could shape the game. It's been playing the role of puppeteer for decades, pulling strings, making nations dance, deciding who eats at the table and who waits in the hallway. India was supposed to be the obedient partner, the rising star that shines but still takes its cues from Washington. But India never played that role. India doesn't dance to anyone's tune. For 75 years, India has been walking that tightrope, working with the West when it serves its interests, leaning toward Russia when it needed weapons, building ties with Iran when energy mattered, making peace with Japan when technology was at stake, and never once allowing itself to be boxed in. That alone frustrated America, but this time, this wasn't strategy, this wasn't slow maneuvering, this was a shock wave. One Indian walked into the global arena and said something that ripped the curtain down. And let's be real, America hates surprises when they're not the ones pulling the strings. Trump himself had to reveal it, almost as if admitting that Washington's dominance is being tested. You want to know why this moment matters? Because it proved that the world isn't bipolar anymore. It's not America versus Russia. It's not America versus China. It's America versus reality, and India, with one voice, just forced that reality on the table. Now let's rewind. For decades, US-India relations were a dance of convenience. America wanted India to counterbalance China. India wanted access to markets, technology, weapons. Washington promised friendship, cooperation, free trade, investment, a so-called strategic partnership. But underneath it all, there was arrogance. America believed India was desperate, that India couldn't rise without US backing, that India would follow orders as long as it got a seat closer to the West. What they didn't expect was for India to grow confident, powerful, and self-assured. And they certainly didn't expect that confidence to be articulated so boldly by one Indian whose words echoed not just in Delhi, but in Washington, in Brussels, in Moscow, in Beijing. Trump revealed the truth because he couldn't avoid it. He had to tell his people, his allies, his rivals that the game has shifted. The words spoken by that Indian leader weren't just a criticism, they were a declaration. A declaration that India isn't here to play the junior partner anymore. It's here to rewrite the rules, and you need to understand why America is so shaken. The US loves loyalty. It rewards countries that toe the line and punishes those that don't. That's the American way of empire, but India doesn't do loyalty like that. India does interests. If it benefits the nation, India says yes. If it doesn't, India says no. And right now, India's no has hit America harder than any battlefield defeat, harder than any economic setback. Because India said no publicly, loudly, and confidently through one man who carried the weight of 4 billion people in his voice. Imagine sitting in Washington, believing you've got India in your corner, counting on its cooperation, planning strategies against rivals, and then suddenly hearing that one Indian declare, "We will not compromise our sovereignty. We will not follow your sanctions blindly. We will not sacrifice our independence for your approval. That's what happened. And Trump, a man who prides himself on deals, on control, on being the one who shocks others, had to admit America just got shocked. This is why U.S.-India relations feel destroyed right now, because the trust, the illusion of control, the expectation of obedience is gone, and it wasn't destroyed by tanks, by sanctions, by trade wars. It was destroyed by the courage of one Indian speaking a truth the West didn't want to hear, and once truth is spoken, it can't be unheard. Now, let's be honest about something. America still has power. It still has its military, its dollar, its corporations, its influence. But power isn't just about strength. It's about perception. And perception just shifted. The world just saw America lose face in front of a partner it thought it controlled. That's why the truth revealed by Trump was so shocking. He wasn't just admitting India's independence. He was admitting America's limits. And you better believe the whole world was listening. China took notes. Russia smiled. Europe reconsidered its strategy. Africa and Latin America saw proof that you can push back against Washington and survive. And ordinary Indians, they stood taller. They realized their country is no longer negotiating from weakness, but from strength. Do you know how powerful that is? One voice, one statement, one refusal shifted the psychological balance of power. It's not just about policies now, it's about pride, and pride is contagious. When one Indian shows the courage to stand up, 4 billion Indians feel that fire. And when 4 billion people feel that fire, the world shakes. America doesn't fear India's population. It doesn't fear its IT hubs or Bollywood or yoga. What America fears is exactly what Trump revealed. An India that acts independently, that refuses to be controlled, that plays its own game. Because an India like that is unpredictable, unstoppable, and unshakable. Now let's talk about why this matters more today than ever. The global order is shifting. Oil politics, currency wars, tech rivalries, military alliances, everything is in flux. America thought it could count on India to be its anchor against China, but India just proved it's not anyone's anchor, it's its own ship, sailing wherever it wants, guided by its own compass, and that terrifies Washington. Because when India acts on its own terms, the balance tips not just in Asia, but globally. Think about it. Trade routes, energy deals, defense contracts, technology transfers. Every one of these becomes uncertain when India stops following Washington's lead. And uncertainty is poison to American strategy. That's why Trump had to reveal the truth. He had to prepare his people for the new reality. India is not America's pawn. India is a player, and not just a player, one of the biggest players on the board. And I want you to let this sink in. For years, America lectured India about democracy, about human rights, about free markets, about how to behave. But now America is the one reacting to India's moves. That's the reversal, that's the shift. The teacher just got schooled by the student. The empire just got reminded it's not the only empire in town. So yes, US-India relations are being tested like never before. Some will call it destroyed, some will call it transformed, but make no mistake, the old relationship, the one where America dictated and India followed, is dead. And it was buried by one Indian voice that dared to speak the truth. And that's why people are calling this a historic moment. Because the strength of a nation isn't just in its weapons or its wealth, it's in its will. And right now, India's will is unbreakable. One voice carried that will to the world stage, and Trump himself confirmed it by admitting the truth. That's why the shock is so deep. That's why Washington is scrambling. That's why the headlines are screaming, because the world just saw India rise, not quietly, not politely, but defiantly. You think America will just sit back and accept this? No, they'll try everything. Pressure, threats, deals, manipulations. They'll send envoys, lobbyists, media narratives, all trying to tame India again. But once a nation finds its voice, it doesn't go back to silence. Once a nation realizes its power, it doesn't go back to obedience. That's the irreversible change. So remember this moment. Remember the shock in Trump's voice when he revealed the truth. Remember how one Indian's defiance destroyed the illusion of U.S. dominance in the relationship. Remember how the world tilted because someone dared to stand up. This isn't just politics. This is history unfolding in real time. This is the sound of a nation declaring its independence not once, but twice. The first time was from colonial rule, the second time from the illusion of American control, and this second independence might be even bigger than the first. It marked the birth of India's assertive military doctrine backed by innovation. The West realized India is no longer a pawn, it's the player changing the game. For decades, India was seen as a balancing act in the global order, a nation that would lean one way or another depending on the situation, a country others tried to influence rather than one shaping the influence itself. But something changed, and that change came from the recognition that India could no longer afford to sit quietly, hoping that the West would respect its sovereignty or its choices. India realized that respect isn't given, it's taken. And once that realization set in, the military doctrine transformed. No longer was it about simply defending borders. It became about projecting strength, asserting independence, and reshaping the rules of engagement on India's terms. When you study the history of India's military thinking, you see restraint woven into its decisions. From the wars with Pakistan to the standoffs with China, India often chose caution over escalation, patience over provocation. That was the old India, the one still carrying the weight of colonial trauma, the one too aware of economic weakness, the one always considering how the West might react if it flexed too hard. But this new era, this is not that India anymore. The doctrine being born now is built on confidence. It is built on $1 trillion economy, on indigenous weapons production, on nuclear deterrence, on alliances that serve India's goals instead of binding its hands. This doctrine says India will not just respond to threats. It will anticipate them, shape them, and crush them before they become existential. That is what rattled the West, you see. For America and Europe, India was supposed to be the obedient partner, the democratic counterbalance to China, the ally who takes orders in exchange for access to Western markets and technology. They never expected India to start saying no. They never expected India to develop its own missiles that rival NATO standards, or to design air defense systems that could challenge Western dominance, or to invest in artificial intelligence and cyber warfare. It's capable of standing shoulder to shoulder with any global superpower. They never expected India to think strategically, not just locally but globally. That was the shock. Because when India shifted its doctrine, it wasn't just a defense plan. It was a declaration of independence all over again. But this time, independence from Western approval. Think about what this doctrine really means. It means India no longer waits for America to sell fighter jets. It builds its own. It means India no longer fears sanctions when it buys oil from Russia. It makes its own payment systems and dares the West to react. It means India no longer asks permission to patrol its oceans. It deploys aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines designed in its own shipyards. It means the days of India being dependent on scraps from global powers are over. That's why the West panicked, because they realized India is playing the same game they used to dominate, but playing it with its own rules, its own innovation, and its own unapologetic confidence. The doctrine is assertive because it's not defensive. Defense says we will survive if you attack us. Assertiveness says you will never dare to attack us because the cost will destroy you. That's why the West is unsettled. The balance of power in Asia no longer depends on American bases in Japan or alliances with Australia. It depends on India's willingness to wield its military power, not as a shadow of someone else, but as an independent force of stability and deterrence. And the fact that India is backing this doctrine with innovation makes it even more threatening. This is not a copycat military. This is not a nation buying second-hand weapons. This is a nation that builds missiles like Agni and Akash, aircraft like Tejas, tanks like Arjun, drones, satellites, cyber systems, all part of a larger doctrine that tells the world India can fight, India can innovate, and India can win on its own terms. The psychological impact of this is enormous. For decades, Western powers believed they could predict India. They thought India would remain cautious, tied down by bureaucracy, corruption, and poverty. They thought India would need Western validation to act. But now India acts first and explains later, if at all. And when Trump revealed the truth that shook the world, it wasn't just about trade deals or diplomatic disagreements. It was about this deeper shift, this doctrine that says India will not hesitate to defend its interests, even if it means defying Washington, London, or Brussels. That's the shocking truth. The West realized India doesn't see itself as a pawn anymore. It sees itself as a king on the chessboard, capable of changing the outcome of the whole game with one bold move. The multipolar world order emerging today is fueled by this doctrine. Russia might have military power, China might have economic clout, America might have global influence, but India brings something different. The willingness to use innovation as leverage. When India tests hypersonic missiles, it tells the world it can match the US and Russia. When India builds anti-satellite weapons, it tells the world it can defend its space assets just like the big powers. When India deploys its own GPS system, it tells the world it won't rely on Western technology. Each of these moves feeds into the doctrine, creating a wall of self-reliance backed by strength. And once you build that wall, nobody can push you back into dependency. What unsettles the West most is that India does all of this without abandoning diplomacy. It is assertive militarily, but it is also calm politically. It still attends global forums, signs trade deals, joins alliances when convenient, but it doesn't let any of these commitments override its doctrine. That's what makes it powerful. It's not reckless, it's calculated. It's not shouting for war, it's preparing for deterrence. And in that preparation, it has become untouchable. The West realized that even sanctions won't break India now, because India is prepared for economic and military independence in ways that no other developing nation has ever been. That realization is the end of the illusion. It's the end of the idea that India could be contained, manipulated, or bribed into submission. And let's be clear, this doctrine didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was born from decades of humiliation, of being treated as a second-class power, of being pressured into compromises, of being told it wasn't ready for global leadership. That humiliation turned into hunger. That hunger turned into ambition, and that ambition turned into innovation. India invested in engineers, scientists, technologists, defense research. It created institutions like DRDO and ISRO that became the backbone of this doctrine. It didn't just buy the weapons, It built the minds capable of designing them. And when you combine brains with courage, you get something unstoppable. That's why the West is nervous, because they know you can't sanction away intelligence. You can't contain innovation once it's unleashed. You can't silence a nation that has found its voice and its strength, so now the West must face a reality it never wanted to admit. India is not its pawn. India is not its junior partner. India is the player reshaping the board, and in this new game, the West doesn't hold the same cards it used to. It can't dangle aid as leverage. It can't threaten sanctions and expect obedience. It can't lecture India and expect compliance. The doctrine has changed the psychology of the relationship forever. And this is why Trump's admission felt so shocking. It was the loud confirmation that the world order is shifting, that the very foundations of Western dominance are being eroded not just by China or Russia, but by an India that refuses to play by old rules. This is the moment where history pivots. The birth of India's assertive military doctrine, backed by innovation, is not just about defense. It's about power, pride, and position in the global hierarchy. And for the first time in centuries, the West must acknowledge India as not just a regional force, not just a balancing act, but as a decisive player capable of tipping the global balance in whichever direction it chooses. And that is the truth they never wanted to face, but now they cannot ignore.